They abandon him in the storm-soaked wilds, his body broken, death waiting in the shadows. Cradled against his chest were two newborn infants, fragile, silent, and destined to perish alongside him. She didn't know his name, she didn't know his nature, and she couldn't have imagined that the dying stranger she pulled from the mud was the Alpha King his own pack had cast out. Elowen had spent years convinced that isolation was survival. The borderlands proved her wrong. That storm-torn evening, beyond the edge of the civilized world, she discovered a warrior collapsed beneath ancient pines, his frame marked by battle, his breathing ragged, and his arms locked protectively around two sleeping newborns. There was something primal in him, a force that pulsed beneath his exhausted exterior. Yet he was fading fast. He gave her a name, Vaelor, nothing else. She didn't press him about the silver burn scars. She didn't demand answers about the amber glow flickering in his half-closed eyes. She saw only a father using his final strength to shield his children from the dark. What Elowen couldn't see was that Vaelor wasn't simply wounded, he was overthrown, exiled, and marked for death. And the moment she chose to save him, she bound herself to a hidden war of pack law, stolen thrones, and a legacy carried in the blood of two innocent twins, where her heart, his kingdom, and their impossible family would collide. Elowen's cabin sat where the forest grew too thick for hunters and too quiet for travelers, a place the world had forgotten, which was exactly why she'd chosen it. The journey back had been agony. Vaelor was heavy, far heavier than any man his size should be, and the twins woke twice, their cries thin and desperate in the pre-dawn cold. She'd wrapped them against her chest, felt their tiny hearts hammering like trapped birds, and forced herself to keep moving even when her legs screamed for rest. By the time she kicked open her door, dawn was bleeding gray light through the canopy. Inside, the fire had died to embers. She laid Vaelor on the rough-hewn table, the only surface large enough, and settled the twins in a nest of blankets near the hearth. They quieted immediately, as if they knew they were finally safe. She wasn't sure she believed it herself. In the growing light, she could finally see him. The wounds were worse than she thought. His tunic hung in shredded strips, revealing a torso mapped with violence. But these weren't the clean cuts of battle or the ragged tears of claws. These were deliberate, methodical. Silver burns crossed his ribs in parallel lines, the flesh around them still angry and weeping. Someone had taken their time with him. Someone had wanted him to suffer. Her hands trembled as she reached for her stores. Yarrow for the bleeding, comfrey for the burns, and the precious vial of winter moon extract her grandmother had left her. She'd been saving it for years, never finding a wound worthy of its power. Until now. As she cleaned the worst of the damage, she noticed something else. Beneath the fresh torture marks were older scars, dozens of them, layered like a brutal history written in flesh. Claw marks, bite wounds, the kind that came from fighting your own kind. "What did they do to you?" she whispered. His eyes opened. Those amber eyes, bright, even in his broken state, fixed on her with an intensity that stole her breath. For a moment, she saw something ancient looking back, something that had ruled and raged and refused to die. "They tried," his voice was gravel and smoke, "to make me forget what I was protecting." His gaze shifted to the twins, sleeping peacefully by the fire, and something in his expression cracked. Not weakness, something deeper, something that looked like love mixed with grief, mixed with an unshakable resolve. "They failed," he said. Elowen pressed the winter moon extract to the worst of the silver burns, watched it begin its slow work of drawing out the poison. She didn't ask who they were. She didn't ask why. She only knew that whatever war he'd walked away from, it had followed him here. And now, whether she wanted it or not, it was hers too. It started just after midnight. Elowen woke to the sound of wood splintering. Not breaking, splintering, like the cabin itself was being torn apart from within. She threw off her blanket and saw Vaelor convulsing on the table, his back arched so severely she heard vertebrae crack. His skin was burning. Not feverish, burning. Heat radiated off him in waves that made the air shimmer, and his eyes had gone completely gold. No iris, no pupil, just molten amber that seemed to pierce straight through the walls. "No," she breathed. "No, no, no." His body seized again, harder this time, and she saw his fingers elongate, bones shifting beneath flesh that rippled like water. Claws scraped deep furrows into her table. The twins started crying, their wails high and terrified, as if they could sense what was coming. Wolf fever. Her grandmother had told her stories. When silver poisoned a shifter's blood, the wolf tried to burn it out, and if the human half was too weak to hold it back, the beast would tear free and destroy everything in its path until the fever consumed them both. Vaelor's jaw cracked, elongating. A sound emerged from his throat that was neither human nor animal, something caught between. She had minutes, maybe less. Elowen dropped to her knees and pressed her palms flat against the earth floor, dirt pushing up between her fingers. The old words came back to her in her grandmother's voice, a language she'd never fully understood but had memorized like prayer. Roots remember, stone endures, call the deep, anchor the wild. Nothing happened. Vaelor's body lifted off the table, levitating in the grip of the transformation, and the cabin shook so violently that jars fell from shelves and shattered. The twins' cries reached a pitch that cut straight through her heart. She dug her fingers deeper into the earth, nails breaking, and felt for something she'd never truly believed in, the pulse beneath the world, the ancient network of root and stone and soil that her bloodline had supposedly once commanded. "I am Warden," she said, voice shaking. "I call the deep. I anchor the wild." This time, the earth answered. Power surged up through her hands like lightning in reverse, vast and old and patient. It poured through her body, and she slammed her palms against Vaelor's chest, felt the wildfire of his transformation meet the immovable force of the earth itself. Hold him, ground him, keep him whole. The gold in his eyes flickered, dimmed. His body crashed back onto the table and went terrifyingly still. For a moment, Elowen couldn't breathe. Then his chest rose, fell, rose again. Human, still human. She collapsed beside the table, hands smoking, and realized with absolute certainty that her grandmother's stories hadn't been stories at all. She was a warden, and she'd just saved an alpha king from becoming the monster that would have killed them all. 3 days passed before Vaelor could sit up without his hands shaking. Elowen kept her distance during his recovery, tending the twins and pretending she didn't feel the weight of his gaze following her around the cabin. The twins had begun to trust her. They quieted at her voice now, reached for her with tiny fingers that gripped with surprising strength. On the 4th evening, as she fed another log to the fire, he finally spoke. "You're a warden." Not a question, a statement of fact that hung in the air between them like smoke. She didn't look at him. "I don't know what I am." "Yes, you do." His voice was stronger now, though still rough at the edges. "I felt what you did. The earth itself bent to your will. That's not luck, Elowen. That's legacy." She turned then, found him watching her with those unsettling amber eyes that saw far too much. "And what are you, Vaelor? Really?" The silence stretched. One of the twins made a small sound in their sleep, and something in his expression softened before hardening again, like he was preparing for a blow. I was, the Alpha King of the Northern Packs." The words should have sounded absurd, impossible, but looking at him now, even wounded and hunted, she could see the truth of it in the way he held himself, the unconscious authority, the weight of command that even exile couldn't erase. "Why were you left to die?" she asked quietly. He looked down at the twins, and for the first time since she'd found him, she saw his carefully maintained walls crack. Because I loved a human. Because I chose her over the purity of the bloodline, over tradition, over everything my kind holds sacred. His hand moved to trace the edge of the makeshift cradle she'd fashioned. Her name was Linnea. She was everything they said an alpha's mate shouldn't be: mortal, fragile, human. His voice dropped. Beautiful beyond words, brave beyond measure. Elowen's chest tightened. Was? Childbirth took her. The words came out flat, stripped of emotion by sheer force of will. The twins survived, she didn't, and my council, led by my own second, declared them abominations, half-breeds with no right to exist, let alone inherit. He looked up at her then, and she saw the full weight of his grief and rage burning behind those golden eyes. They gave me a choice: abandon my children and keep my throne, or lose everything. His jaw clenched. So I chose them, and my second chose betrayal. He hunted us into the wild, had his wolves torture me with silver, and left us to die where no one would ever find us. Vaelor's gaze held hers. Except you did. Elowen looked at the sleeping twins, half human, half wolf, and entirely innocent of the war being waged over their existence. They're beautiful, she whispered. They're the future, he said, if we can keep them alive long enough to become it. The howl came at dawn, a single, piercing note that shattered the fragile peace like glass. Elowen's blood turned to ice. She'd been feeding the twins, and her hands froze mid-motion as the sound echoed through the forest, closer than anything should have been able to get to her hidden refuge. Vaelor was on his feet before the echo faded, still weak, but moving with predatory grace. Scouts, he said, voice deadly calm. 3, maybe 4. They found our trail. How long? Minutes. He moved to the twins, gathered them with careful urgency. They'll come fast once they catch our scent fully. We need... No. Elowen's mind raced through terrain she'd walked 1,000 times, every hidden path and natural trap the borderlands offered. The ravine, half a mile east, there's a crossing, old fallen tree over rapids. Looks solid, isn't. Understanding flickered in his eyes. You want to lead them to it. I want them in the water when they realize you're not just some rogue wolf. She met his gaze. Can you run? His jaw set. Can you? They moved. Elowen led them through the forest like a ghost, using every trick her isolation had taught her, stepping on stones to hide their prints, breaking branches at odd angles to suggest a panicked flight. Behind them, she heard the wolves, snarls and crashing footsteps, the sounds of hunters who'd found their prey's trail and stopped being careful. The ravine appeared through the trees, the roar of white water drowning out everything else. The fallen oaks stretched across it like a promise, wide enough to look safe, rotted enough to be deadly. Across, she commanded, slow and careful. It'll hold us, barely. Vaelor moved first, the twins pressed against his chest. Elowen followed, feeling every shift of the treacherous wood beneath her feet. Below, rapids churned over rocks sharp enough to shred flesh from bone. They made it to the other side as the first wolf burst from the tree line. He was massive, gray-furred and battle-scarred, eyes blazing with predatory triumph. 2 others flanked him, younger but just as deadly. The lead wolf's lips pulled back in a snarl of recognition. The fallen king, he growled, voice caught between human and beast. How far you've crawled. Not far enough, apparently, Vaelor replied, positioning himself between the wolves and Elowen. The lead wolf stepped on the log. The usurper wants the half-breeds dead. You're just the prize. Then come collect your prize, Vaelor said softly. The wolf charged. The log splintered under his weight, not immediately, but enough. The crack echoed like thunder. He tried to leap back, but momentum betrayed him. Wood gave way with a shriek, and all 3 wolves plunged into the rapids, their howls cut short by the merciless water. Elowen watched them disappear around the bend, battered by rocks and current. "That won't be the last," Vaelor said quietly. "I know," she replied, "but now they know you're not alone." They abandoned the cabin before the bodies were even cold in the river. Elowen took only what they could carry: dried meat, her grandmother's medicine kit, and blankets to wrap the twins against the killing cold of the high peaks. Everything else, every comfort she'd built in her years of isolation, she left behind without looking back. The mountains were their only chance. The terrain was brutal enough to slow pursuers, and there were caves in the upper reaches where they could disappear for days, maybe weeks, long enough for Vaelor to heal fully, long enough to plan what came next, if they survived the climb. The first day was manageable. Vaelor pushed himself hard, jaw set against pain he refused to acknowledge, and the twins stayed mercifully quiet, as if they understood the stakes. But on the second day, the weather turned. The blizzard came down like a white wall, erasing the world. Wind howled through the passes with a voice that sounded almost alive, almost hungry. Snow came in horizontal sheets that stung exposed skin and made every breath a battle. Vaelor stumbled. Elowen caught him before he fell, felt the tremor in his arms, saw the way his legs shook with effort. The wolf fever had taken more from him than either of them had admitted. He wasn't ready for this. His body was failing. "Give them to me," she said. You can barely stand." She pulled the twins from his arms, secured them against her chest with strips of cloth bound so tight they became part of her. "I know these mountains. You don't. Let me lead." For a moment, she thought his pride would kill them all. Then he nodded, and she saw what it cost him to surrender even this much control. They climbed. Elowen's world narrowed to the next step, then the next. The twins' weight pressed against her ribs, their warmth the only proof she was still alive. Behind her, she heard Vaelor's labored breathing, the occasional scrape of his boots on ice-slicked stone. She didn't let herself think about how far they still had to go. Hours blurred together. Her legs screamed, her lungs burned. The twins cried once, thin, desperate sounds that the wind tried to steal, and she sang to them, her grandmother's old songs about summer and safety, her voice cracking in the cold. When she finally saw the cave mouth, she almost didn't believe it. Dark stone, partially hidden by an overhang of ice, exactly where her memory promised it would be. She stumbled inside, Vaelor collapsing behind her, and the sudden absence of wind felt like a blessing from forgotten gods. She laid the twins down gently, checked them with trembling hands, still breathing, still warm, still alive. Vaelor was already unconscious, his body finally surrendering to exhaustion. Elowen built a fire with the last of her strength, then sat between the Alpha King and his children and wondered how much longer any of them could run. Elowen woke to absolute silence. Not the peaceful quiet of a sleeping forest, but the unnatural stillness that came before predators struck. She sat up slowly, careful not to wake the twins, and looked toward the cave entrance. Snow had stopped falling. Dawnlight filtered through in shades of pale gray, and in that light she saw them, paw prints in the fresh snow, circling the cave mouth, large, recent, too many to count. They'd been found. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Vaelor was too weak to fight, the twins too vulnerable to run. She moved to the entrance and looked out at the mountainside, seeing what the wolves must have seen, their tracks carved into the snow like an arrow pointing straight to their hiding place. Foolish. She'd been so focused on survival, she'd forgotten they were leaving a trail any hunter could follow. But what if you could erase it? The thought came in her grandmother's voice, whisper soft but insistent. Elowen pressed her hand against the stone wall of the cave and felt it again, that pulse she'd touched during the wolf fever, the deep network of root and stone and ancient patience that ran beneath everything. What if you could ask the mountain to hide you? She didn't know if it would work, didn't know if she was strong enough, or if the mountain would even listen. But she closed her eyes and reached down through layers of rock and frozen earth, searching for that vast consciousness she'd barely understood when she'd called it before. This time, it rose to meet her like an old friend. Power flooded through her, not violent like before, but steady and inexorable as glacier ice. She felt the mountain's awareness spread through her senses, felt every tree root and sleeping seed, every creature denned against winter, every stone that had stood for 1,000 years. Hide us, she thought. Hide our tracks, hide our scent, make us invisible. The mountain heard. Snow began to fall again, but only around the cave, soft, deliberate, filling in their footprints with impossible precision. Wind rose and carried their scent away, scattering it across miles of peaks. The very stone seemed to shift, the cave mouth receding into shadow that eyes would slide past without seeing. When Elowen opened her eyes, the world looked different. Alive, aware, impossible. She turned to find Vaelor awake, staring at her with something between awe and recognition. The old texts spoke of wardens, he said quietly. Humans born with the earth's favor, fated to stand beside alphas in times of great change. I'd thought they were legend, propaganda to justify ancient alliances. He shook his head slowly. But you just commanded a mountain to hide us. Elowen looked at her hands, still tingling with residual power. I just asked. No. Vaelor pushed himself upright, wincing but determined. You didn't ask. You spoke, and the earth answered. That's not magic, Elowen. That's destiny. She wanted to argue, wanted to say she was just a woman who'd chosen isolation over purpose. But the mountain's presence still hummed beneath her skin, patient and eternal. If I'm a warden, she said finally, then what does that make us? Vaelor looked at her for a long moment. Dangerous. The bridge was their only way forward. Stone and ice, ancient and crumbling, it spanned a chasm so deep the bottom disappeared into shadow. On the other side lay the Pass of Echoes, a maze of narrow canyons where even the best trackers lost their prey. Safety, if they could reach it. They were halfway across when Elowen felt it, a wrongness in the earth's pulse that made her stumble. Vaelor. The attack came from both sides at once. Wolves poured from the rocks like a flood, cutting off their retreat and blocking the path ahead. Not scouts this time, warriors. A dozen at least, moving with coordinated precision that spoke of military training. And at the center of the group ahead, a wolf larger than the rest shifted into human form. He was broad-shouldered and silver-haired, with eyes like winter frost and a smile that promised cruelty. Hello, my king, he said, voice dripping with mockery. You've led us on quite the chase. Vaelor positioned himself between the betrayer and Elowen, the twins pressed against her chest. Kale, I should have seen your ambition before it became treason. Ambition? Kale laughed. I saved our people from your weakness, from the contamination you invited into our bloodline. His gaze flicked to the twins with disguised disgust. Abominations that should have been drowned at birth. Touch them, Vaelor said softly, and I'll tear your throat out with my bare hands. Bold words from a broken king. Kale gestured, and the wolves began to close in, moving with careful menace across the narrow bridge. But you can barely stand, can you? The silver saw to that, and your human pet can't save you this time. Vaelor's hand found Elowen's. When I move, you run. Get the twins to the pass. Don't look back. No. The word came out harder than she'd ever spoken before. Elowen. I said no. She felt the mountain's presence rising beneath her, felt the ancient stone of the bridge resonating with her fury. I'm not letting you die for us. There are too many. I don't care. Vaelor turned to look at her, and whatever he saw in her face made him go still. You're going to bring down the bridge. Just their half. You could kill us all. Then trust me. She met his eyes, like I trusted you. For a heartbeat, everything hung in balance. Then Vaelor nodded and shifted his weight ready the instant she acted. Elowen pressed both hands to the stone and spoke to the mountain in a voice that wasn't entirely her own anymore. Deeper, older, carrying the weight of every warden who'd ever commanded the earth. Break. The bridge answered. Stones screamed as fractures spiderwebbed through the ancient rock. Only on Kale's side, only where his wolves stood snarling. The section collapsed with a roar of breaking stone, taking half the pack into the abyss. Kale barely caught himself, hanging from the edge, his face twisted with disbelieving rage. Elowen and Vaelor ran. Behind them, Kale's howl of fury echoed through the mountains like a promise. This wasn't over. They made it to the Pass of Echoes as night fell, collapsing in a sheltered alcove where wind-carved stone formed a natural fortress. The twins had cried themselves hoarse during the flight and now slept with the exhausted stillness of infants pushed beyond their limits. Vaelor sat with his back against the rock, breathing hard, and Elowen could see the truth he'd been hiding for days. He was fading. The silver poisoning hadn't just weakened him, it was still killing him, slowly strangling the wolf inside until there would be nothing left but a hollow shell. She'd seen it in the way his eyes had lost their glow, and how each transformation he'd fought off took longer to recover from. If Kale caught them now, Vaelor would die, and so would they all. "There's a ritual," she said quietly. He looked at her, too tired to hide his desperation. "What kind of ritual?" "My grandmother told me once about the old packs, how wardens used to anchor alphas to the earth itself, giving them strength beyond their pack bonds." She moved closer, pulled out her grandmother's journal, pages brittle with age, filled with words in the old tongue. "It requires a willing alpha and a warden who's strong enough to channel the mountain's heart." "Could it kill you?" "It could." She met his eyes. "But doing nothing definitely kills you, so we're doing this." She didn't give him time to argue. She built a circle of stones around them, placed her hands on his chest, where the worst of the silver burns still marked his skin, and began to speak words she barely understood, words that tasted like soil, and ancient rainfall, and the deep patience of roots. The mountain answered immediately. Power poured through her in a torrent that would have torn her apart if she'd been anything less than what she was. She felt Vaelor's wolf, trapped and dying, poisoned nearly beyond saving, and wrapped it in earth-blessed strength. The silver burned away like frost under sunlight. His broken places knit together, and something deeper shifted, a bond forming between them that went beyond words or blood. Vaelor gasped, his back arching, and his eyes ignited with golden fire. "Let it out," Elowen commanded. "Show me." The transformation was nothing like the fever-driven nightmare she'd stopped before. This was deliberate, powerful, beautiful. His body shifted with fluid grace, bones restructuring, muscle flowing into new configurations. In seconds, where a wounded man had knelt, a massive wolf now stood, silver-black fur, eyes like molten gold, radiating a presence that made the air itself feel heavier. The Alpha King fully restored. He should have been terrifying, should have sent her scrambling backward in primal fear. Instead, Elowen reached out and rested her hand on his massive head, felt him lean into her touch with something almost like reverence. "Not a monster," she whispered. "Never a monster." The wolf's eyes met hers, and she saw Vaelor looking back, all of him, human and beast unified at last. Behind them, the twins stirred, and the great wolf moved to stand over them, a living shield against anything that would dare threaten his children. Elowen smiled. "Now let Kale come." Kale came at dawn with what remained of his forces, 20 warriors, battle-hardened and loyal to the usurper's vision of a pure bloodline. They entered the Pass of Echoes expecting to find a dying king and his desperate human protector. They found something else entirely. Vaelor met them in his true form, the massive silver-black wolf whose presence alone made lesser wolves drop their eyes in instinctive submission. But Kale had come too far to surrender to old instincts. He shifted and charged, claws extended, going straight for the throat. The fight was brutal and swift. Vaelor moved with the speed of a king restored, every motion precise and devastating. He caught Kale mid-leap, slammed him into stone hard enough to crack ribs, and when the usurper tried to rise, Vaelor's jaws closed around his throat, not killing, but holding. A humiliation worse than death for an alpha who'd claimed the throne through betrayal. Yield, Vaelor's voice rumbled, half human even in wolf form, or die. Kale's eyes blazed with hatred, but his body went still. Around them, his warriors watched their leader defeated, saw the true alpha standing over him, and one by one they bared their throats in submission. The rebellion ended not with a massacre, but with a choice, and they chose their rightful king. 3 days later, in the quiet after the storm, Vaelor found Elowen sitting at the edge of the camp, watching the twins sleep in their makeshift cradle. He'd shifted back to human form, though she could still see the wolf in the way he moved, the fluid grace, the barely contained power. The scars were gone, the silver burns healed. He looked like what he was, a king preparing to reclaim his throne.
"My wolves are gathered," he said, settling beside her. "By tomorrow, we can begin the march to the capital. Kale's supporters will face judgment. The council will be reformed." He paused. "Everything I lost can be restored." "Then you don't need me anymore," Elowen said quietly. His hand caught hers, urgent and warm. "That's where you're wrong." She looked up, found him watching her with an intensity that stole her breath. "I'm not asking you to follow me back as a subject," Vaelor said. "I'm asking you to return as my queen, to stand beside me not because of ancient pacts or Warden bonds, but because—" he struggled with words that didn't come easily to an alpha. "Because you saved more than my life. You saved what I'd forgotten I was. You reminded me that strength isn't just in dominance, it's in choosing love over fear." Elowen looked at the twins, half human, half wolf, peacefully dreaming of a future where they wouldn't have to hide what they were. "They'll need a mother," Vaelor continued, "and I need someone who sees the man before the crown." She thought of her cabin, already burned by Kale's wolves, of her isolation, which had never been safety, only hiding, of the power humming beneath her skin, waiting for purpose. "A Warden queen," she said slowly. "They'll call it unprecedented." "Good," Vaelor smiled. "Let them. We're building something new." Elowen took his hand and felt the mountain's approval resonate through her bones, earth blessing what her heart had already chosen. "Then let's go home, all of us."